But I think that the regime that ends up running Iran when this war ends will not be subservient to the United States and to Israel. So that's why I think it's hard to imagine us, the United States, winning this war in any meaningful way.
这两天，想必大家的手机大概都被德黑兰上空那场漫天的火光刷屏了。在一片喧嚣和喝彩声中，好像很多人都觉得那个曾经无所不能的超级霸权又找回了往日的威严。但古人云：立涉大川，不进则退。越是这种看似大劫的时刻，我们越要听听那些明白人的冷思考。今天，我们要请出一位真正懂行的人，美国国际关系学的泰斗，进攻性现实主义的旗手约翰·米尔斯海默教授。这位老先生一向以冷峻、理性的现实主义视角著称。在最新的访谈里，他不仅没有为这场斩首大捷叫好，反而用一种近乎残酷的客观告诉我们，美国其实正步入一个前所未有的战略误区。他甚至直言不讳地揭示了一个让华盛顿极其尴尬的真相：这艘名为美利坚的巨轮到底在被谁推向深渊？如果你也觉得当下的世界局势雾里看花，想看清这场战火背后的真实底牌，那么不妨随阿新一起静下心来，听听这位美国顶级智囊的深度剖析。这场地缘博弈的终局远比我们想象的要深远。咱们接着往下看。
So, Professor, one thing controversial about the war is its purpose, or justification. The Trump administration has presented different explanation from, say, attack on this nuclear program, attack on missile industries, regime change, and then demand unconditional surrender of Iran. So, what is it?
Well, I think it's clear that the main objective here is regime change, because you cannot achieve any of those other aims, such as eliminating Iran's nuclear enrichment capability, eliminating its ballistic missile capability, or getting Iran to stop supporting Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. None of those goals can be achieved unless you have regime change. And it's very important to understand that not only do you have to change the regime in Tehran, you have to replace it with a regime that will be subservient to the United States and to Israel. You can't just replace the regime with another regime that resists what America wants and what Israel wants. So the key goal here is regime change. But my belief is that the United States will fail to achieve this goal. The Israelis and the Americans have to use military force to knock off the regime, to eliminate the existing regime. And of course, it's very important to emphasize that they intend to do this with air power. They're not talking about sending American ground forces into Iran the way the United States military invaded Iraq. That's not going to happen here. In fact, President Trump has just said that would be a foolish idea, and the United States will not send in ground troops. That means that we have to cause regime change with air power, with bombing Iran alone. And of course, this is the Israelis and the Americans working together. There is no evidence in the historical record that this can be done. We have never seen a case where regime change resulted simply from an aerial attack or from air bombardment. So President Trump is betting that he can do something that has never been done before.
There is the U.S. plan, or the lack of a plan. They talk about like 4 weeks of a military operation, and then they talk about 100 days or into September. Do you see a clear outline of how how long the war will go on?
Well, when the war started on February 28th, the White House thought, the administration thought, that we would decapitate the leadership. And of course, we achieved that goal because the United States and Israel killed Ayatollah Khamenei and a number of other Iranian leaders. And we thought that decapitation would lead Iran to surrender, that we would win a quick and decisive victory and that we would get a new regime. That was a foolish belief, and of course it didn't happen. So there was no regime change. Then the United States thought that it could strike Iran very hard immediately after the decapitation attack. And by striking Iran really hard, we would again cause regime change and get Iran to surrender to us. That did not happen. And we're now talking about a protracted war. We're now talking about a long war. And in this long war, the United States is going to be at a significant disadvantage. It's very important to understand that once Iran withstands the initial attacks and the war gets drawn out, Iran is in a much stronger position than the United States and Israel, because all Iran has to do to win this war is to survive and at the same time continue to inflict punishment on Israel, the United States and its allies in the Arab world, and to continue to shut down the Straits of Hormuz and cause great pain not only in the Middle East, but around the world. So the fact that the United States was unable to win a quick and decisive victory tells you that the United States is in trouble as this war settles into a protracted war. There's no way that Iran can defeat the United States military in a fight. This is like the Vietnam War. The United States won every battle in the Vietnam War. There was no way the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong could engage the American military and win a victory on the battlefield. The United States, as I said, always won the battles, but the United States lost the war. And the same thing, by the way, was true in Afghanistan. Nobody would deny that the United States was infinitely more powerful than the Taliban, but the Taliban won the war. After 20 years, the United States left Afghanistan. And by the way, the Soviet Union had the same experience in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. So what you're going to see happen in the Middle East is that the United States will inflict massive pain on Iran, but it will not be able to win the war in the long term because it will not be able to overthrow the existing regime, number one, and number two, replace it with a regime that is subservient to the United States and to Israel. It's just very important to understand that you cannot get Iran to give up its ballistic missiles, to stop its nuclear enrichment program, and to stop supporting the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas unless you have a regime in place in Tehran that is subservient to the United States and Israel. And if you look at how this war has started and how it's likely to play out, it's hard to see how the United States is going to get a regime in Tehran that will do what the Americans want. And indeed, as the United States and the Israelis kill more and more Iranian civilians, that will cause the Iranian people to rally around the regime, to support the regime, and to hate the Americans and to hate the Israelis and not want to see a regime in place that accommodates American and Israeli interests. So this serious bombing campaign that we're now engaged in, where we're killing large numbers of Iranian civilians, does not facilitate regime change. It hinders regime change.
About somehow Israel had decided to attack Iran, and that forced the U.S. into the decision to attack Iran, together with Israel. And secondly, the Israelis, it seems they have different goals or targets in Iran. They don't really care about what kind of a government there will be, but as long as there is a weakened Iran, as long as Iran is not a threat to Israel, that's fine. So they have different targets.
I don't think so. Let me tell you what I think about the U.S.-Israeli relationship and how it relates to this war. First of all, this is a war for Israel. The United States has no reason to be fighting this war other than the fact that Israel has basically forced us to fight the war. Iran is not a strategic threat to the United States. There is no threat to the United States from Iran. And in fact, if Israel did not exist, the United States would have good relations with Iran. The reason the United States has bad relations with Iran is because of Israel. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has been in power in Israel for a long period of time, has been desperately trying to get the United States to go to war against Iran with Israel for Israel. And he finally succeeded. He got Donald Trump to go to war in a really serious way. So again, this is a war for Israel. This war is not in the American national interest. Now, you raised the issue of what are the goals that the United States has. I think that Israel's goals are America's goals. We are interested in regime change because the Israelis are interested in regime change. The Israelis are driving the train here. President Trump basically follows in the wake of Prime Minister Netanyahu. I know that it's very difficult for most Chinese and most foreigners to believe that a country as powerful as the United States could be, in effect, subservient to Israel's interests in the Middle East. But that's just the way it works because of the power of the Israel lobby in the United States. So again, this is a war for Israel, and the United States is pursuing the same goals that Israel has insisted on, and that is regime change. My third point is, and your comments hinted at this, in a very important way, the Israelis are interested in more than just regime change. What they'd really like to do is break apart Iran. They'd like to do to Iran what happened to Syria. Syria was broken apart, much the way the Soviet Union was broken apart in 1991. That's what Israel would like to do. That would permanently weaken Iran, and that would be better than regime change. But the Israelis understand that that's not a goal that you want to articulate, and that's a much more difficult goal to achieve. So the focus at this point in time on the part of the Israelis, and of course the United States as well, is on regime change. But ultimately, if the Israelis could do it, they would like to get the Americans to help them break apart Iran the same way that Syria has been broken apart. See, it's very important to understand that Israel's goal in the Middle East is to make sure that every country in the region is greatly weakened. The Gulf states, which of course are closely allied with the United States, have been targeted by Iran. And Iran is targeting the Gulf states not simply because American military bases are located on those Gulf states, but also because the Iranians have a vested interest in making those Gulf states pay a price for allying with the United States. And the Gulf states today are begging the United States to stop the war. They want the war to stop because they understand if the war goes on and the war escalates, enormous damage, maybe even catastrophic damage, could be done to those Gulf states. Now you ask me, what do I mean by that? It's very important to understand that at some point in the future, the Iranians might feel compelled to escalate by attacking the energy infrastructure in the Gulf states, to include Saudi Arabia, and in effect, targeting their oil fields, targeting their ability to reprocess oil, to produce natural gas. So their energy facilities could be destroyed by Iran. Furthermore, there's the desalination plants. The Gulf states are heavily dependent on desalination to produce drinkable water for the population. The desalination plants are big, fat targets that the Iranians could go after. So if they went after the oil infrastructure or the energy infrastructure and they went off after the desalination plants, they would basically make the Gulf states unlivable. Now you ask, can the Iranians do that? The answer is they can do it very easily. The Iranians have an enormous number of short-range ballistic missiles. They might not have that many long-range ballistic missiles, which are the missiles that hit Israel, but they have an enormous inventory of short-range ballistic missiles. They have an enormous inventory of drones, and it's quite clear that the Gulf states are running out of defensive interceptors that can knock down those missiles and go after those drones. So the Gulf states are already vulnerable and becoming increasingly vulnerable. And if at some point down the road, the Iranians decide that they're going to attack full scale those desalination plants and the oil infrastructure in those Gulf states, this would have catastrophic consequences, not only in the short term, where it would clearly have catastrophic consequences, but over the long term as well. So this war is a disaster for the Gulf states. And the Iranians understand that. And that gives them leverage. That means that they can threaten the Gulf states in ways that cause the Gulf states to distance themselves from the United States. It's quite clear to me that this war is not going to end quickly, and it's not going to end in a way where the Americans and the Israelis can declare victory. This is not to deny that the United States and Israel will do enormous damage to Iran. But I think that the regime that ends up running Iran when this war ends will not be subservient to the United States and to Israel. So that's why I think it's hard to imagine us, the United States, winning this war in any meaningful way.
听完米尔斯海默教授的这段剖析，阿辛在茶水间里真的是替美国人感到悲哀。什么叫伤害不大，侮辱性极强？这就是以前我们说美国是被犹太资本绑架了，很多人还不信，觉得那是阴谋论。现在好了，美国学术界真正的泰山北斗自己出来盖章认定了，这就是一场美国替以色列流血的战争。想想看，一个曾经号称一超独霸的国家，他的总统，他的军队，竟然为了一个中东小国的利益，心甘情愿地跳进火坑。米尔斯海默用了个词叫 subservient， 屈从的，做附庸的。大家品品，堂堂世界第一强国，竟然用上了这种词，这耳光扇得有多响？而更让阿辛觉得后背发凉的是他对战争走向的死亡推演。特朗普政府以为只要搞定斩首行动，把哈梅内伊除掉，伊朗就会像当年的伊拉克一样瞬间崩溃。事实是，他们确实得手了。但结果呢？正如米尔斯海默预言的那样，你杀害了他们的领袖，炸毁了平民的家园，不但没有换来投降，反而激起了整个民族的血性，把原本可能速战速决的冲突生生拖成了美国最害怕的持久战。这就是美国最致命的短板，他们太迷信火力，却根本不懂人心。从越南到阿富汗，现在又轮到了伊朗。美军每次都能在战场上赢下所有战斗，但最后却总是狼狈地输掉整场战争。为什么？因为靠几百架飞机扔炸弹是炸不出一个对你死心塌地的傀儡政权的。在这个大泥潭里，美国投入的越多，陷得就越深，拖得越久，他引以为傲的国力就被放血放得越彻底。说到这里，咱们再回过头来看看咱们中国自己。面对中东的惊涛骇浪，咱们一直是不紧不慢，呼吁和平，做生意。有键盘侠急了，说中国怎么不出手啊？是不是软弱啊？看完这期视频，你该明白了吧？这就叫大国定力，这就叫不战而屈人之兵。当美国人在沙漠里为了别人的利益拼命流血，掏空国库的时候，我们在干嘛？我们在搞科技突破，我们在建工厂，我们在完善我们的全产业链。最高的战略，从来不是自己下场去争勇斗狠，而是坐在岸上，静静地看着对手在泥潭里把自己折腾到油尽灯枯。美国用自己的霸权衰落，给我们上演了一出绝佳的反面教材。这局棋才刚刚下到一半，接下来就让咱们安安稳稳地坐在茶水间里，看着那个曾经的霸主是如何一步步走向他自己挖好的坟墓的吧。好了，今天茶水间的深度复盘就到这里。你觉得美国能从中东泥潭里拔出腿来吗？欢迎在评论区留下你的高见，别忘了点赞、订阅阿欣的茶水间，让我们一起看透这大变局的底牌。下期再见。